assure you that what you will observe is a vast wasteland.
Try and channel it.
Free and uncorrupted communication.
Well, welcome. Thank you for coming this afternoon. I'm Ronald Tobin, Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Programs here at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker this afternoon, Dr. Lee Alley. I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing Dr. Alley, not because his accomplishments don't deserve a lengthy presentation, but because you really want to hear him more than me. But nonetheless, a little bit of a background. Lee Alley's educational background is in mathematics, physics, and management system. He's been a chief information officer at several campuses. Most recently, he was associate vice president for academic affairs and CIO of the vast University of Wisconsin system, where he was responsible for planning, policy, and coordination of strategic system-wide initiatives relating to instructional technology, distance learning, faculty development, library systems, and statewide operational coordination across 26 campuses with 7,000 faculty. So he had an enormous portfolio. One of his success stories, one of his many success stories, I might add, is his completion of a 3-year, 15-institution software implementation project. He left academe in 1997, Wisconsin, to plunge into the business side of the emerging web-based learning marketplace and started his own firm as president and founder of World Class Strategies. Subsequently, he came from the warmth of the private sector in 2001 out into the cold of the University of South Dakota system, where he is currently Chief Information Officer responsible for technology, faculty development, academic policy analysis, student enrollment services, data management, and other exciting things. But it is his considerable experience in speaking about the role of technology in teaching and learning that attracted me to him, and that is the source of my invitation to have him talk to us today. If Lee were a literary scholar, we would say that his interest in how well the student receives learning would make of him a specialist in reception theory. But we'll be happy today simply to note that at every stage of his career, Lee Alley has been committed to discovering ways of helping institutions have a significant impact on students. Now, to understand what Lee is up to, let's set the context. The University of California at Santa Barbara, like most academic institutions these days, is seeking to find the right balance among the 3 imperatives that face us: access, cost, and quality. Technology has often been able to facilitate the challenges involved, but it can also complicate matters. If, for example, it can offer access to greater numbers, more often than not, it is not cost-effective, and more media do not necessarily translate into quality learning. Indeed, our experience with instructional technology at Santa Barbara is that we constantly have to repeat our mantra, with which Lee is perfectly in agreement: pedagogy first, technology second. As the Greek root of technology, techne, indicates, technical application is a tool, or at its best, an art. That is, it is a means and not an end. Instructors have to develop a strategy for their classes that includes a reasoned recourse to that tool, technology, whose use is second nature to our students. But novelty is power, and an institution can spend a prince's ransom on devices that enhance the attractiveness of presentation without necessarily deepening the learning process. Yet we have to be attentive to innovative experiments like the Technology-Enabled Active Learning Project, TEAL, at MIT, that is designed to transform the impersonality of the large lecture into a small group format for which the instructor serves not as the sage on the stage, as the saying goes, but as the guide on the side. Now, there's been much talk in recent years about another kind of transformation, the need to make universities into student-centered institutions, as the buzzword goes. Yet the principle of any true community devoted to the life of the mind is that it is not so much student-centered, but learning-centered, a place where everyone can participate in the exchange of ideas, and where a Nobel Prize winner can be so impressed with the cutting-edge research of a freshman that he invites him to join the professor's research team. I'm speaking, of course, of our Nobel laureate Walter Cohn and his interaction with a member of our freshman summer start program just this past fall. Learning by all, then, and technology is the topic of Dr. Ali's talk today, and I'm delighted he's been able to join us. Lee Ali.
Well, hello. Maybe we're just a little bit louder. 1, 2, 3. Maybe I don't need to use the podium, if that's everybody here all right this way? Okay, I'm a walker, pacer. I just discovered that my wife is apparently herself a Victorian literature professor and studied at the Sorbonne, and she apparently would get along with Dr. Tobin perhaps better than with me on occasion, with my engineering style of running a household. But it turns out she's a reception theory expert. I told her, I said, you know, we're just a couple of simple hamsters that got married and ran off to South Dakota to live in the hills. And what do you think the folks at University of California at Santa Barbara how they're going to receive me? And she has her reception theory. She said, Lee, don't worry. I've seen a lot of your speeches, and every speech you give is received better than the next one. I was, much of my perspective about higher education and student-centered learning and consumer-oriented marketplace and so on. Although I spent about 40 years in higher education, several years of that was spent on the business side, as Dr. Tobin mentioned. And I learned probably as much about higher education during that period of time as I did the rest of the time combined. It was a wonderful, hair-raising experience. A little bit of explanation about why I'm where I am now. My wife was associate provost at a university in Ohio, and I was playing East Coast businessman and living a pace that was just horrendous. I spent 200 hotel nights in the last year I was in business, and in fact, of course, flew well over 100,000 miles. I knew I had to do something and change my lifestyle when I was on a plane one day. And I traveled so much and spent so much time in airports, I started carrying photographs of my children and family with me. And if it was a long flight, I would pull out some Scotch tape and I would tape the family photographs to the seat back and the side of the plane. And the flight attendant came by one day and said, "You're putting Scotch tape on our airplane. We don't like that." And I said, "But I live here." Which was true. So I had met what is now my wife as a fellow road warrior in business too, and we'd done some business together, and we agreed to be a mature couple of newlyweds, and we ran off to South Dakota to live in the forest. And we're having a ball. Much of the perspective I bring to you, though, is the result of those few years in business. The sense of the consumer-driven marketplace. I thought I understood student-centered when I was with the South Dakota Board of Regents and persuaded them to help organize a student-centered distance learning plan. I thought I understood student learning when I was designing a course for online instruction. But little did I know that I didn't have a clue what consumer-oriented and student-centered meant until I went into the business side, when life revolves around your relationship with your clients, and it's a state of mind that is to be cherished. So I would like to share with you some of my combined thoughts about kind of the instructional design ideas, the teaching ideas, and the student ideas. This is somewhat of an outline just to give you a hint of where we're going. Dr. Tobin had asked that I give a presentation that might be appropriately titled Learning and Technology and National Trends, or National Trends in Learning and Technology. So I've tried to focus on what I consider to be the dimensions, pedagogical, learner, instructional technology, the research issue, which is highly relevant, and organizational or context trends. I'm an engineer, remember, and it depends on what I need to deny or claim to at any given time. I'm also a mathematician and a physicist and a computer scientist, and I spent a little bit of time in all of them. You know, there's a sense in the public mind that we have this collection of a body of knowledge of the trade over here on the left, and the purpose of the teacher is to somehow transmit that information over to the students, and then the students somehow are able to then have that body of knowledge as well. And in fact, they're developed during the bubble of the 90s. EduCom and Cause, and then finally EduCause, and a lot of other organizations for CIOs such as I was. We began to listen to a lot of our own rhetoric and began to believe it. And there developed this sense in the 90s, and more as the time went on, that there was, in fact, it was a debate. It's about the content. Content is king. It's the content, stupid. And so that tended to be the library people and the semantics people. And then there were others who said, no, it's the conduit. That's what's driving this. And as you recall, during the 90s, that's when we thought a business plan would somehow magically just manufacture cash and profits and so on. And we had this sense in higher education that if we could just form some sort of a subsidiary distance learning organization, it would turn into a cash cow. It would solve our financial problems, and we would somehow, in fact, every university in the country, as near as we could tell, thought it was going to be a net exporter of distance learning courses. You remember that? There was a lot of discussion about content and conduit. In fact, I was sitting in a meeting, a workshop organized by EduCom, the predecessor of EduCause, a number of us gurus sitting around the table talking about where is instructional technology heading and the web and so on. And I guess it was about 1996. And someone at the table said, you know, if the faculty would just understand that they're just part of a delivery system. They're the last 100 yards of a delivery system. They're part of the conduit. What it's all about is getting that content transmitted to the students. And if we could just somehow disintermediate the process, which means let's just go around the professor, you know, let's cut to the chase, get this information over to the kids, hand them a CD or a diskette, we're out of here. So there was a lot of this, this sort of, we kind of had the juice here that we had this figured out, that if you could somehow have contents of the knowledge of the occupation, profession stored somehow, and then if you could have great networks, you could transmit it, that you'd have it licked. And in fact, there's subsequently been a number of efforts that you'll recognize a lot of these to in fact package content. The real kick in the shins that woke a lot of us up was when MIT, and now if you're an engineer, MIT doesn't do wrong. They kind of define the laws of physics however they choose to, and then we study what they decide. When MIT, you know, here's all this rhetoric about content is king, content is the value, the role of an educational campus is the last mile of the delivery system for a body of knowledge, to redistribute knowledge to our progeny and our offspring. MIT really pulled the cork on this concept when they said, we'll give it away. We'll just take the content of our online courses and our digitized course materials, and we'll post it so that any human on earth can have access to it. And it took some of us time to really figure out what in the world is going on. They have just given away, they have destroyed the market in the very thing that gives MIT its value. And that helped some people begin to figure out that, well, maybe MIT sees the model a little different than the rest of us. Maybe they figure they're not giving away the farm. Maybe they figure they're continuing to keep what's most valuable to them. But in the meantime, a number of other universities had to do their Me Too initiatives. So Rice and Carnegie Mellon, they organized their little free content programs. Since then, of course, you heard recently that Google has announced the Google Print program. And then the Harvard Library Open Collections program. So there's a number of instances where it wasn't that long ago that we said content is the value of the whole system. Now we've got our leading institutions that are supposed to know better are giving away their value. So there must be some other explanation. What's happened is that, and this is I think a lot of the change that's taken place, and I began to see this better from the business side, the center, the student-centered learning concept, I'm seeing two C's, but they're not content and conduit anymore. It's consumer and curriculum. If one principle that has served me very well as I have dealt in the finance side, the academic side, and the business view of higher education, there's three things, the cornerstones that define an academy, a university. And of course the research is out there and money, but three things: faculty, students, and curriculum. If you want to know what makes this place different, ask to understand the faculty, understand the curriculum, and understand the students, then you understand the organization, the academic enterprise. But a lot of the focus has shifted to the curriculum and the consumer. And in fact, we've decided that you don't necessarily conduct the act of teaching and learning by simply sending over some conduit, some content over to some other person, and if you grunt hard enough and make it happen fast enough, you can accumulate some knowledge and call it learning. What happened was, I'd like to just share with you, it was about this time, I decided it was time to teach my first distance learning course. I had, as a CIO, I had helped provide the content, the conduit and so on, and I'd been in these debates about content and conduit. And so I volunteered to teach a physics course. Now, I had gotten 2 awards for outstanding teacher and professor at other universities, and I thought I was a pretty slick professor, pretty good. And so I decided I was going to teach it online. This was in Nebraska, or Wisconsin. It was in the mid-90s, I think 95. And I started this physics course, and I started down the road, and about the second class period, I realized something wasn't working. About the third class period, I was really scared. And it was about a third of the way into the semester, and this is the honest truth. I had to ask the students to come meet me at one of our campuses. And I walked in and I said, folks, we have a very serious problem. And they said, yes, we know it. This course is bombing. It's terrible. And I knew it was terrible. I could feel it wasn't happening. I was teaching, but they weren't learning. And I was teaching harder and harder, and they weren't learning anymore. And you can't grunt harder as a teacher doing the same old thing and make sure they learn. And it occurred to me for the first time that although I was apparently a reasonably adequate physicist and scientist, I was not really a good educator. I was able to stand in front of the students and tell them what I know. They happened to have been learning for some reason, and it occurred to me, what occurred to me was, I really didn't know why or how the human brain was learning. I didn't understand the process. And literally, honestly, in an act of desperation, I went back to the campus directory and looked up professors in the education college and said, I got to come talk to you. I got to find out, how do humans learn? I want to learn some of this learning theory stuff. And began to realize that there's an entire domain of scholarly pursuit called understanding pedagogy and human brain learning. And right away, as soon as I started Discovery, it became obvious. I didn't know a hill of beans about how my students had been learning all this time. In fact, it was kind of surprising they had learned at all as a consequence of me just doing what my professors had done, stand in front of them, tell them what I know. So as a consequence, it was about that time that Steve Gilbert, who had been a vice president with Educom, had been asked to write or be an editor of Change magazine. You may be familiar with that, kind of a professor's magazine about teaching. And I happened to be driving him somewhere. We were going to a conference, and I told him about this horrible experience I was having and the process I was going through. And about that time, I had begun to realize the problem is I don't understand how humans learn. And I needed to do a really fast study. So I read voraciously. I interviewed lots of education college professors. I read what I could in terms of success stories and awards, and began to realize, and of course I'm an engineer, so I thought it's time to construct a model. It's time to begin to understand the process and to analyze this thing. And so I eventually arrived at the notion that if I could learn the 10 things that are most important about how to manage the process of a student learning, then I could maybe recover this course. See, I'm still in a panic over this course. Well, Steve actually wrote an article about this epiphany that I was going through, the great humiliation. And then, by then, all of my colleagues in the country knew that I had totally ruined a distance learning course. And I was on the board of directors of a couple of organizations that held conferences about this sort of thing. It was embarrassing for them as well. But it was that embarrassing truth that everybody else was having the same trouble, but I happened to admit it. So I spent a lot of time, a huge amount of time, and trying to recover. And the first thing I did, by the way, is I went back and met with the students, and I said, look, we can cancel, we got choices here. We can cancel the class, or you can find some way to get off work and we'll turn this into a traditional class. Or I said, you know what? I don't know if this is going to work, but I need your help. I'm going to treat this like we would a business exercise. I need you students to pitch in, and I'll teach you the best I can, but you're going to have to learn a lot of this on your own, and sorry, it's my first time online. That was the first of 10 brilliant ideas that I had stumbled into. I was turning over responsibility for learning to the student. They took ownership of that issue. They said, all right, we got a professor here, he's humble enough to admit he's got a problem. We're going to have to bail this guy out if we're going to finish this course. They took it upon themselves to start meeting and discussing with each other. They took it upon themselves to admittedly fill in for my inadequacy to present the course in a way that was most productive. And as a consequence, one of the top 10 keys to a quality course, and at first we thought it was for online courses and realized it's not limited to online. And so I set about the objective of saying, what are the 10 most important things to know? And one of them on the list turned out to be turn over responsibility for learning to the student. But number one on the list, and this was the most important, this is when the light bulb went on and why I knew I had failed so miserably. I thought as a professor I could teach to a student and transmit the knowledge. And when it occurred to me by reading what someone else said, some learning theory people, they said the nature of the human brain as a learning organ, you cannot teach it. You can't transmit knowledge. The human brain has to start as a newborn baby and recreate all the knowledge it will ever have. It has to learn everything it will ever know. That's an internal sweat and equity exercise that they have to go through. So it occurred to me then that, oh, I'm a professor, I'm a teacher, but I can't teach. The student has to learn it. And so everything about learning theory and about teaching, whether it's in class or online, has to deal with the fact that we recognize that when a human brain is going to learn and it comes packaged in some 18-year-old's head, that brain has to go to the trouble to do its own learning. And that brain has to spend all of the sweat and the work to make it happen. And my role as a professor was to provide an engaging and motivating and productive environment for that brain to be effective at doing the learning it needed to do. So knowledge is not transmitted, knowledge is constructed, everything then falls from there. I'm not going to go through all these in that detail, but I wanted to give you a sense, and you can go read the article, and I think Dr. Tobin has it. But I wanted to just point out the notion that there existed these 10 points, and I never intended for this to happen. I went to a conference and presented it and got a lot of feedback. I was asked to publish it, and we put it on in a refereed journal and got published, and we've identified 6 languages it's been published in. We were invited to a keynote in China to deliver this thing, and this is just some engineer that found out that even though I'd had 2 teaching awards, I didn't know how to teach, and it turned out it was very timely at the time, and this was quite some time ago. Student motivation, just as an illustration, an example I've used a number of times. I was traveling in Mexico alone, and I needed to use a restroom a lot. And I went into a place of business. It was a little local mom and pop Mexican restaurant, and there was mom and pop, and their daughter was waiting tables. And there is no way a gringo in a Mexican town can make any gesture in the world to say, where's the restroom? Especially when her parents are watching. How's this gringo that doesn't know any Spanish, how are you going to get through this? It was a desperate time. And I'll draw a picture. I can't do that. I didn't know a single word of Spanish, and I'm beginning to dance. And finally, she says, el baño. I will never forget that word. I was extremely motivated to understand the next time. So if you can create the sense of motivation in a student, they're going to learn, but it's all about helping that student, put the student in a frame of mind where they will drive their own learning. Higher learning from reflection, that's kind of the mental white space, as we called it. And I wound up approaching this as a scholarly research project where it wasn't any new knowledge for mankind, but it certainly was for me. And I read every possible thing I could in the literature on human brain learning. And as a result, the press kind of picked up on this, and we had a good run at it, and it was very helpful in the consulting. But I wanted to point this out to say I I think we've been confirmed that these 10 principles, that doesn't mean there's not 11. There's a 12th one out there somewhere that probably should be on this list instead. Everybody should have your own list. But the point is that this is what, to me, what student-centered teaching and learning is about, if we were focusing on these things. A little bit reinforcement came when the national academies, it's the National Academy of Sciences and the others put out this publication, How Students Learn, and they went to ask what are the 3 most important things that drive success in instructional design and learning environment, and they identified basically these 3 that are already on our list. In terms of when Dr. Tobin asked, we'll talk about technology and learning and the national trends. The point I'm trying to make here in terms of the pedagogical trends is to talk about learning and technology. We're not through until we've talked about these concepts of the pedagogy underlying the success of the technology and how we go about deploying it. It's something that's very interesting to me is every organ in the body has a function, as I discovered in Mexico. The brain is a learning organ, and it needs to have a certain amount of inputs. It needs to have an environment to be productive. It has its functions, and it turns out that this brain is a fascinating organ, and there's a lot of very good literature on that. And I think it would be wonderful if every professor in the country, if every teacher would spend a few hours, if they haven't yet, and even update now and then on what is the brain learning research that's going on. It really does help us be a better professor, and it's helped me a lot of times as I've taught courses since then to think, yeah, the student is in this point of view right now. My wife has been teaching for University of Phoenix, and she and I are both kind of converts here. That's how we met, with some of this research and practice. And she puts these principles to use in her teaching online for the University of Phoenix, and it pays off very well. So to talk about technology and learning, the national trends, we first start with the pedagogy of the student. That's what the student-centered learning is about. And then there's some other aspects. Besides the learning theory, there's something a little bit more social. Like I said, my wife and I decided we weren't very good business partners, but we were much better. We argued less we thought we'd argue less as husband and wife, so we ran off to South Dakota, and we're having a great time. But she came with a teenage son who's a wonderful gentleman, who's at Williams College, where Dr. Tobin was. And he's as smart as both of us put together. But the first time I met him, he was about 15 or 16, and he came to visit us at the house. And Kate and I had been married about 2 years, and I'd met him a number of times, but he stayed with us for quite some time. And I finally went to Kate, my wife, at one point, and I said, Kate, you know the deal here. He's old enough, I'll never adopt him. He doesn't need another father. We need to get along. I need to like this boy. He's a great kid, I know, but I said, Kate, I can't figure him out. I just don't understand him. For one thing, he's constantly got a telephone in one ear. He's got an MP3 player plug in the other ear. He's got the speaker going on a cell phone. The TV's running. Another phone is ringing somewhere, and he's typing on 2 keyboards. He's ordering something on eBay, and he's IMing with somebody else. I said, I can't figure this kid out. There's something wrong, Kate. And of course, she's mom. She said, no, he's a good kid. He'll be fine. I said, you know what? Something else? Every waking hour, this kid's connected on a network. He doesn't have a life outside of this network. He doesn't care all that much where he is, as long as he's surrounded with this environment of all these stimuli going on. I said, he certainly seems to be a good kid. He certainly is not as, he doesn't revolt as much as my son, who's about 15 years older. When he was that age, he wanted to be very independent. Furthermore, the kid's arrogant. He's just overconfident. And so we had some discussions, very frank, and she knew I was trying sincerely to get along with this young man, and she knew I was impressed with him. He's obviously extremely capable. And then I went to a conference, and there was a lady giving a keynote speech, and she's listing the features of the new millennials, they're called in the book. And I went running up to the speaker afterward, and I said, that's my wife's son. Every single feature is the same thing. They're like that. And since then, I've had many discussions with college retention officers and recruiters and other people who deal with these young folks, and I've had focus groups of students at the campuses. And you know what? Her son is not at all an outlier. I was the outlier. I just didn't get it. That's why we need to have stop having gray-haired people write recruiting brochures for students. But the learners of today are very, very different than, her son is 18 now. He's a freshman, fall freshman in Williams College. My son is 31. He's a webmaster for an education college in Arizona. They are totally different people. They're very smart, they're very successful, they're wonderful people, but my son considers her son to be just a little strange. But you know, he considers us a little different too. But the point is that these kids now are very, very different. And what I wanted to bring out in this part when we talk about learning and technology, national trends, is we're never going to find that we've finally figured it out, okay, this is the way young people are. We'll design courses this way, or we'll pick out the technology, this will take care of it. There is no way that the technology environment that is most productive and fertile for my wife's son at Williams College, there is no way the technology environment that's ideal for his brain that he carries around to help it learn would have been appropriate for my son. And certainly not for me. I'm overwhelmed watching him do it, let alone try to do it myself. So the point here is that the cultures of these kids change. And so as we talk about what works in technology and learning, and as time goes on, if we ever think finally we've got ourselves an instructional designer or instructional support group, they figured out these kids, that's when we worry, because next week the kids are going to be different. And to ask our faculty to track with this is a lot, and I'm more and more convinced of this all the time. My wife's the head of accreditation and assessment back in South Dakota. It's amazing the additional load we're putting on faculty now. It's like asking the traffic cops to measure each other's speed. It's incredible the amount of time we're going through, and she deals a lot with engineering accreditation and ABET and then the regional association. And the amount of time that I didn't even know about the word assessment when I was a professor, and now it's a major way of life in a lot of institutions, or you don't get reaccredited. She was just on an accreditation evaluation team in another state, not California, and the school did not pass. One word they tripped over and they didn't get it, and the word was assessment. These regional accreditation groups are going absolutely nuts, not good or bad, just nuts. They're really serious about assessment, formative, summative assessments and so on. So we're asking faculty to take on more and more, and what I'm suggesting is we need to have in our instructional support groups, in our pedagogy and technology support groups, we need to have people who are helping the faculty keep up with these trends. Now the faculty are there with the students, you know, they see them in classes and so on, but it's getting really complicated to provide a technology environment for these kids that migrates and evolves with them, that tracks with them. And if we're just simply say, well, we're going to buy the latest, neatest gadgets and put it out there in the classrooms as smart classrooms and the teachers will really teach good, that's not the case. We've got to have some sort of a match. The student, the sociology of the student with the technology environment, and that's even before the professor walks in the room. Okay, now the techie stuff. We're talking more and more about storing in, say, course management systems and other things, the content of the course. And then the conduit, we're looking at Wi-Fi, and coming on the heels of current cellular is this EVDO, which is going to be, they call it broadband, but it isn't. It's just a little faster than fast dial-up. Satellite distribution systems and so on. But the point is, we've got these databases of content in things like Sakai, WebCT, Blackboard, and Desire to Learn, and a growing wealth of wireless and wired technologies for delivering it. Oops, went the wrong way. Where I see this going, and this is kind of a leap here, Dr. Tobin, but I think what's happening is we're going into more and more of a fuzzy world. When I was in optimization and teaching optimization courses, we dealt with this fuzzy sets business. It seems like a lot of stuff is getting more and more fuzzy-edged. The document, the concept of a handout, used to be you hand out a two-page handout to a kid, to a student, you knew 8.5 by 11, you knew where the edges of that document were. Then we came up with hyperlinks, and well, it's not really the edges of the document. If you can click on it, you can go to somewhere else. Well, let's get to the point now with the tablets and the handwriting and the the digital form of these documents, they're beginning to merge and sway and move around, and the concept of what constitutes the complete document isn't exactly clear. When you ask the student, go to this place, read this article on this topic, well, there's a question of just how many deep do you go in the hyperlinks before the student has completed the article. We've got fuzzy edge network appliances, I'll call it. I'm deeply involved in one of these satellite radio companies, and it's in the process of getting tied up with some other technologies, and they call it convergence. As XM satellite radio, as they join with the GPS and the PDA functions and MP3 in a cell phone, it's coming. Now, and then we go back to the EVDO, the high near broadband speeds for cellular. We're getting to the point now where we'll be able to talk literally about satellite communications on a cell phone with nearly full motion video. And if we'll just humble ourselves a little bit and go look in Korea and Taiwan, we'll see our future in terms of what these kids are going to be holding in their hands in about 4 or 5 years. It's already in their hands over there. The fuzzy edge campus, Wi-Fi, the different kinds of wireless networks are spilling off campus. It's not at all clear now when you've gone onto campus and gone off of campus if you've got a metro wireless network. Fuzzy edge logons. You know, it used to be, it was very clear. You'd go to log onto a system, you'd do your stuff, and then you log off, and it was zeros and ones. Either you're on the system or you're off. Now we're going to these always-on systems. Cell phones are becoming rather minute independent. You basically pay your $60-80 a month, and you're always on all the time. You've got instant messaging on the computers, and these kids tend to be always on. So it's not at all clear when we plug in and plug out. And so when we look at the instructional technology, one of the points I want to make here is that it's not coming in discrete modules anymore. There's unclear boundaries. I want to mention just a little bit about also these efforts at collaboration. Dr. Tobin mentioned the technology-enabled active learning at MIT. Pew has been walking around with this business of basically they're talking about automating the huge lecture hall, and they call it a new redesign project. And then there's a general spirit still of trying to find the way that we're going to have interoperable systems in instructional technology so that we can share the media. Even UNESCO, the United Nations, has gotten on board with their Open Educational Resources Initiative. The effort there is not so much to provide global courseware, but to take the course content that we've decided you don't have to charge for here, and that can be that can be a very solid assist to other nations, third world nations. Research, I just want to point out that typically I've been an engineering research professor, and that's an entrepreneur's business. And that pretty much has to be a bottom-up process. But I thought it was very interesting that separately the National Academies has published this document study, Information Technology and the Future of the Research University. It's a great read if you've not been through that. Very confirming. The main point that they make is, one, we know that information technology is going to continue to be a major driver and enabler in research. And secondly, we absolutely know we don't know how. That's why the faculty are out there doing what they do. They're turning over the rocks and discovering. But the reason why that's relevant here is that in a research university, you don't, of course, disconnect what goes on in the classroom with what goes in the research. And what we're seeing is that it wouldn't be a good match if we've got rather dormant technologies over in the research domain, and we got all this vibrancy going on in instruction. I just want to make the point that whatever's going on in research, information technology is exceptionally relevant to what goes on in the classroom, of course. This is kind of where I wanted to get to, as much as anything. There are some things going on nationally, some that are scary, and these are very, very important. The first number of these deal with students, student records, student services, student support, and so on. I have a borrowed office at one of our universities in South Dakota that's right next door to the Dean of Students. Now, I came up in the university up through the faculty, and I saw the student as a well-behaved, learning he was a kind of a life support system for a brain. They would deliver their brain to class. We'd go through this, this exercise. I never dealt with my car was stolen. My boyfriend's an alcoholic. My parents have separated. I was in jail last night. I never dealt with that, except a number of fabricated excuses for late, but these kids show up at college and they bring all the things with them that humans have. It's just that we professors don't see them very often. By being next to the Dean of Students office, I have discovered that an awfully lot of what goes on in a university that has a huge impact on retention of the students, on the quality of their learning, on their ability to focus, is very substantially impacted by what else is going on in their lives. And with these current students, what's going on in mom and dad's life? It turns out when kid shows up, the moms and dads come with them. They're called helicopter parents. They come and they hover. And they ask, why did my son not get 85 on that test instead of 83? But the point I want to make here is that as we talk about learning and technology, the story isn't complete until we've talked about what's going on with these students in terms of how we treat them on these campuses in terms of the more holistic human being. There's a number of things going on. One is that we ought to be traumatized by, and that is as if we haven't learned enough from the Internal Revenue Service and its record-keeping processes and regulations. Now the federal government is seriously considering the establishment of what they call a National Unirecord Database. That is effectively a national student records system for higher education. The horrible advances that are going to have to be made in forcing standardized definitions of things nationwide, in forcing the universities to comply with specific reporting criteria, it is a very scary prospect. Think of it this way. How would you like to have your entire student record system at UCS be abandoned and you ask the IRS, would you run it for us? That's exactly where this is headed. It is an issue, and we need, I think, to take a strong stance on that. It turns out that a lot of corporate Software America has discovered what's called the enterprise systems for student support. And to illustrate a point, one of my areas, besides being the CIO, I'm also the University Systems Student Enrollment Services person. And one of the things I'm very interested in is these new, corporate America calls them customer relationship management systems. We call them student relationship management systems. And more specifically, we call them online recruiting, we call them online admissions, online retention, and online advising support. I've set about, as a change agent, trying to provoke our university recruiters into catch on that the rest of the country, the coasts, where progress tends to begin a lot of times, is beginning to convert to a much more paperless, more online approach to recruiting, identifying, recruiting, and attracting students. And corporate America has discovered that as well. So I decided, well, what we'll do is we'll arrange a little webcast by each of these new vendors that are in the marketplace that are selling e-recruitment systems. One of our universities has already gone with Princeton Review bought a company called Embark, and they're close to committing to a paperless student recruiting. And do you know how much that is a change for a recruiting department? No more printed view books, no more brochures, no more flyers. They're talking about totally paperless recruiting. Look at the Colorado School of Mines. They're headed that direction, and they're enjoying some great success. I discovered there are already 17 generally respectable, viable companies who are offering viable software consulting and advertising services products for universities. It appears that higher education is making a major switch to two things. One is going to much more paperless online student services, and secondly, to partnering with corporate service companies who bring experience and background in this sort of thing. I think what I'd like to do is go ahead and cut to the seventh item, the two-headed CIO. I can say that because I am one. I bring that up to make a point. I see a CIO's role, and to it's like a construction project where you have subcontractors, but there's an architect. To an extent, a CIO is both the architect, or a main architect, and is one of the subcontractors. To an extent, it's like an orchestra conductor who also plays one of the instruments in trying to do both jobs. And one of the things that I like to point out is that when we're dealing with the gestalt of campus instruction, pedagogy, technology, research, and so on, one of the things that I think I've learned is that of the two roles that a CIO plays, the preeminent, the most important role that a CIO plays is that of the conductor, the architect, the leader, the convener, the one who keeps peace sometimes, maintains civility, but certainly a sense of group effort. I know that that's one of the things that's being discussed on this campus, and we had a chance to meet with Dr. Lucas, Mr. Lucas, a little while ago, and I suggested to him that I think as you folks move forward in your discussions, it would be a very good idea to think of those two separate roles, and to keep in mind that all of us that are involved in technology on a campus, one of the things that we have to constantly adjudicate is most of what happens in academic and research technology is important. It is the most important. It's not about payroll, information systems. The most important technology is about teaching and learning. On the other hand, the tension is that at any given time, it's very likely too that the most urgent thing happening in technology is payroll, student registration, and if you don't do those on time, you may as well not do the other stuff. And so one of the things that we need to balance in the technology gestalt is how do we be sure that we're able to pursue the most important things on their agenda, sort out things according to an importance metric, and then separately and at the same time sort out the things that are very urgent. And if you think that's complicated, you should be with an institution that had a medical school. Now you've got the most important thing, you've got the most urgent thing, and you've got life-threatening. And so you've got data systems on clinical treatment of patients and drug interactions. Now you've got 3 computers down. Which one do you bring up first? You know, the one that registers a student, the one that gets your research done, or the one that saves a life. On the other hand, over the next 10 years, which is the most important? Well, you've got that mission critical stuff. So those are just some loose thoughts in response to the phrase that Dr. Torben asked me to address, and that is the learning and technology, the national trends. There's some thoughts of mine. Be glad to, if we have any time remaining, be glad to take any questions, certainly any advice, because I do have a job trying to do this stuff back home. Be glad to take back any wisdom that you'd like to share with me. Or if you just have any comments you'd like to share with the others. We have a microphone for you if you hold up your hand. So they're recording this, so I think what they'd like to do is not just for you to be heard here, but to get it onto the soundtrack. Yes, sir. Could you tell me what department you're in? And
I'm the geology department, and I teach a large oceanography class. Large, about 100 students, something like that, and I use a lot of technology.
I'll bet there's a lot more interest recently.
Yeah. The tsunami was a great learning moment, teaching moment.
Motivate the students.
Yeah. Oh, they came in really hyped up.
Great.
I'm finding an interesting thing as I've gone more to writing assignments and whatnot. The students are really asking for more instructions, almost like they're being socialized in high school to memorize content and feed it back, even more in the last couple of years. And maybe it's the emphasis on standards, but I'm finding that students, and I feel like I'm giving extremely detailed instructions, but I'm not telling them how to do everything. I'm saying, here's the subject, here's the paper, here's the kind of things I expect. Research this subject and write about it. They think that's vague, and I think it's very specific. So, and I've done this for a number of years. So, how does that fit into this? Students that live in the non-structured, environment, and they're wired, and my experience with the students is somewhat different.
Well, I'm not sure we do disagree. I asked my wife's permission to use her son as an object of study here, and she said, yes, have at it. But she says that about a lot of the things I say I want to do. If you go back to the slide, and I'll make this available if it's in use, the slide says the students are conformists and compliance-oriented, but in terms of that, although they like in a non-structured environment, they like for the environment around them is what I'm suggesting, and this millennials rhetoric talks about the same thing, that they can be flashing around. There's no apparent rhyme or reason to what they're doing. But the explanation is they like being told, but here, step by step, do this. And the explanation is that these helicopter parents have been there all along as they were growing up. And the baby boomers' parents have said have driven them to hockey practice, and then soccer practice, and then singing lessons, and then gymnastics, and then to school. And that they've grown up with mom and dad saying, do this next, now do this, now do this, now Saturday morning, go to the tennis tournament. Do well, exceed, go to sleep at 9, get up at 12, we're going to go do this again. And I see this in the kids that I interact with. It is certainly in my wife's son. He is so ready to be told what to do, but he is extraordinarily tolerant of this confusing array of overwhelming stimuli coming into his brain. And he can sort it out and deal with that very comfortably. But if we say, okay, go to sleep now, it's like, okay, wake up. It's true. And that's why it was so fascinating when I started reading these books about these new millennials and the explanation they offer. I'm not a sociologist or anything or a psychologist, but the explanation they offer is these kids were raised being driven around and driven by parents who say, I want you to perform on this goal, I want you to develop this skill. And when they get to college, that's why the kids are very happy and mom and dad go with them. When I went to college, I'd stop at the boundary of the campus, and I got out and I said, I'll see you in 4 years. And it was, I'll be fine from here on. The kids wouldn't think about doing that these days, is the reputation, is they want mom and dad there. And it's not that when I first started talking to the student services people, I also have retention and student affairs issues. And the student services people are beginning to complain. They're getting more and more parents intruding. They want to call up and ask the dean of students, why did my son get that grade? What's wrong with your system there? And that wouldn't have happened 10, 15 years ago. And the explanation is the kids want it. Mom and dad have always been there looking over their shoulders. And probably the pendulum will swing. So I'm not an expert. I'm just repeating what I've heard and a little bit of my. The rest of you, have you seen? How many of you seen this kind of thing? Is it consistent with your experience? Yeah.
The students signed the release form for their parents to look at their data.
Yeah. Yeah.
Comes
Well,
along with the check, you know.
the feds require that, and the students are very happy to do it. Yeah. The FERPA regulation requires a student to authorize parental access. And the kids, they're perfectly happy having mom and dad pay the bill and vote their stock. You know, Johnny, I paid your tuition, sign up for this. Okay, Mom.
Well, I'm sort of attacking this problem by telling them that I expect them to research the subject and figure it out themselves.
And it's funny, sometimes we have these assumptions that we make about what they're getting, and sometimes I find if I just tell them,
Yeah.
sort of insult their intelligence almost. I mean, it's not really, but say what I don't think I need to say, that I'm making this assumption that you will actually research this subject and that I don't have to tell you all these intermediate steps. And I don't know if I get across to them, but that's my latest tactic.
It throws a wrench in problem-based learning. I taught a course about 2 years ago, and it took a while before I realized, here we go again, don't know what I'm doing. This time I knew the technology and the instructional method, but I didn't understand the sociology. I was telling these kids, I'm going to deliberately give you project assignments that are not very well defined, because part of your learning process is to refine the question, and I need you to come back to me and challenge me to do a better job of saying, let's negotiate a topic. They floundered. No, tell me exactly what I'm supposed to do. And it's apparently more severe than it has been in the past, and it's something about these millennials. And 10, 15 years from now, it'll be a different issue. Who knows? You know, when their kids go to college, or 30 years. Any other comments? Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Shirley?
Oh, I was just wondering if you'd say a few words about the digital divide, because we do have students who are unlike the millennia as well.
I wish you need to have someone that's more up on that than I am. Frankly, I'm out of date on that. Uncle.
I can make a comment. I don't want to, maybe I'm talking too much, but
No.
I give all my students a CD and they have to install it on their computer, so I hear every problem that they have. And what I find is a big lack on this campus is of some way of supporting students who get spyware and viruses on their computers, and their computers are all corrupted and they don't know how to make something work. But that's sort of a local problem. But anyway, it's a comment. It's a challenge.
It's interesting. If I really am having trouble, I look for a young person. I'm very, very prejudiced. If I have a computer problem, walk the halls till I find the younger person, the better. And so I'm obviously not having the experience and seeing what you're seeing. And I don't at all doubt it. It probably has something to do with some selectivity about who I'm with. Obviously some of these kids are absolutely brilliant. They can do anything. They know about it all, seemingly. And then obviously there's still some